An IQP is a project that includes both the engineering side but also the humanistic social science side.
From what I know, for IQP, it's a group-based project to get students better acquainted with working in big groups so that they're prepared for their MQP.
So you're working on something that's technical, but you also get in that social science, so it's a chance for engineering students to broaden their horizons and do something different than they normally would.
It's usually overseas. So you're usually working with international people.
You work on a project with a group to help solve some problem that is specific to that area.
It's also, I guess, the main way to get to do a term abroad.
Unfortunately, many students seem to have only a partial understanding about the goals and history of the IQP. Originally conceived as part of the WPI plan in 1970, the Interactive Qualifying Project, or IQP, now stands as one of WPI's signature programs. The IQP is designed to help students bridge the gap between technology and humanity, to realize the impact of science and technology on society. To understand why the IQP was created and why it is still important today, we must understand what mindsets and events influence the IQP. Immediately following World War II, U.S. supremacy in technology was unquestioned. Revolutionary technologies such as the polio vaccine, television, jet airplanes, and the promise of space travel dazzled the nation. Yet technology had another side that made Americans uneasy, especially after the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb in 1949.
They rather indicate how far the advances of science have outraced our social consciousness. How much more we have developed scientifically than we are capable of handling emotionally and intellectually.
For all the dazzling hopes created by technological advances, an undercurrent of anxiety about the double-edged nature of new technology troubled the American psyche. By the late 1960s, this unease would lead to calls for greater social responsibility in the use of technology, one of the main principles of the IQP. In the 1950s and early 1960s, WPI was a traditional top-down institution. Students could choose only 2 electives, and participation in ROTC was mandatory. The university had a narrow curriculum designed to feed Worcester's wire and steel industries.
It was almost a military school, very rigid, no flexibility, no developmental creativity.
But on May 29, 1970, the faculty voted for the WPI plan. A radical restructure of the curriculum. It called for 2 qualifying projects. One was in the student's major, the MQP. The other explored the relationship between science, technology, and society, the IQP.
I think there's a need for everyone to participate in activities for the greater good. And engineers are unique in a technological society because they understand the technology as well, better than other people in society. I mean, that's so they have the ability to be engineering types, people with technical backgrounds, have the ability to be leaders in society.
WPI's stagnant curriculum in the 1950s and American unease about technology would soon boil over. In the next 2 decades, American international development projects, the Vietnam War, the environmental movement, and a revolution in American colleges all led to the creation of the WPI plan and the IQP. Following World War II, America stood as the best equipped nation to give foreign aid. In a curious mix of Cold War politics and humanitarianism, America poured billions of dollars into international development projects. From airport construction in Bolivia to improved farming in Ethiopia, malaria eradication in India, and new highways in Thailand, U.S. development projects span more than 40 countries around the globe.
We must embark on a bold new program for making the benefits of our scientific advances and industrial progress available for the improvement and growth of underdeveloped areas. but our imponderable resources in technical knowledge are constantly growing and are inexhaustible.
In 1961, President Kennedy expanded U.S. programs with the so-called Development Decade.
To those people in the huts and villages of half the globe struggling to break the bonds of mass misery, we pledge our best efforts to help them help themselves.
Kennedy's passion for foreign development sparked incredibly high hopes. However, many of these efforts fell apart because planners arrogantly transferred technology into less developed areas, ignoring local environmental and cultural factors. For example, from 1950 to 1970, American aid funded 8 dams on Afghanistan's Helmand River to promote agricultural development and economic stability. But American planners failed to consult with the local farmers or consider local farming methods. Instead, they chose to work with the monarchy, its elite associates, and corrupted local officials. As a result, the dams did not solve any problems, but rather created many more. The sudden increase in water supply waterlogged fertile farmland, and poor drainage increased downstream soil salinity. Afghanistan was not an isolated mistake, but rather characteristic of many American technological development programs around the globe. Imposed from the outside and ignorant of local conditions, these development projects often created serious social and environmental problems in the countries receiving aid. Americans believed the injection of technology could catapult the so-called backward societies into modernity within a few short years. However, imposing modern technology on traditional groups of people often devastated ecosystems and tore apart local communities. Instead of a careless transfer of technology to the developing world, what was really needed was more culturally and environmentally appropriate technology. One point the IQP stresses is that students tailor technological solutions to local needs and environments, a key lesson learned from failed projects like the Afghan dams. Steeped in Cold War competition for influence in developing nations, U.S. involvement in Vietnam began in the 1950s. From the early development projects to the subsequent warfare, the U.S. showed the same overconfident attitude towards technology as used in Afghanistan and other international development projects. America's entire war strategy was rooted in the notion that technological superiority would triumph. Few people figured more prominently in the technological approach to the war than Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. Formerly an executive at the Ford Motor Company, McNamara brought a new system of planning to the Department of Defense that stressed statistical models. The young, highly educated team McNamara assembled, known as the Whiz Kids, firmly believed in America's material and technological superiority.
Statistical analysis methods gave such overconfidence to the decision makers that they had the numbers to prove they were going to win this war.
By relying on state-of-the-art technology, McNamara's team felt America was invincible. Massive bombing campaigns like Operation Rolling Thunder and Linebacker devastated Vietnam with more than 6 million tons of bombs, nearly double what the Allies dropped in World War II. But America's overwhelming military technology failed to deliver victory. The North Vietnamese displayed an unflagging ability to come up with ways to evade American surveillance and military strikes. Unable to strike decisive blows, the U.S. strategy to win the war with technology became futile, creating a long, brutal war.
The technology was so beautiful that they fashioned a whole military strategy around it and lost the war.
In 1973, the U.S. signed a ceasefire with North Vietnam. Without the support of the U.S. military, South Vietnam fell to the North in April 1975, ending the war. In his memoir, McNamara stated that American ignorance of Vietnamese history and culture cost the U.S. a victory in Vietnam. Blinded by a belief in America's technological invincibility, U.S. officials threw technology at Vietnam without understanding the Vietnamese people and their history, or the relationship between technology and humanity. The failure of military technology to win the war spurred Americans to rethink the connection between society and technology. In the 1960s and early 1970s, an awakening of ecological concern escalated into a nationwide environmental movement. In 1962, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring opened people's eyes to America's growing chemical dependency. Carson focused on the effects of DDT, a man-made insecticide she said was as crude a weapon as the caveman's club. Silent Spring explains how DDT contaminated groundwater, destroyed food supplies, and killed countless birds and animals. But this was not all. Between 1940 and 1968, Americans doubled their solid waste production. New suburbs gobbled up land, large cars guzzled fuel, and interstate highways destroyed wilderness and farmland. In 1969, several televised environmental disasters captured the attention of millions of Americans. In January, a spill off of Santa Barbara dumped 100,000 gallons of oil into the Pacific Ocean, covering 20 miles of white sand beaches. In June, Ohio's Cuyahoga River burst into flames due to extreme levels of chemical pollutants. Biologist Barry Commoner singled out technology as the main culprit for environmental destruction, saying technology has flourished in an effort to enhance productivity and improve human life at the expense of nature. Misuse of technology in Vietnam also added to concerns of environmental destruction. The U.S. sprayed more than 12 million gallons of Agent Orange and other chemicals over Vietnam, stripping bare 25% of South Vietnam's forest. In stark contrast to the devastation of Vietnam was the inspiring Earthrise photograph from the Apollo 8 spaceflight. People found the image so striking because it highlighted the frailty of our planet in a vast, empty universe. The 1960s environmental movement brought real change to America, the Wilderness Act of 1964, and in 1970 both the Clean Water Act and the formation of the Environmental Protection Agency.
The great question of the 70s is, shall we surrender to our surroundings, or shall we make our peace with nature and begin to make reparations for the damage we have done to our air, to our land, and to our water?
All these ecological changes fueled a new sense of environmental urgency. On April 22, 1970, 20 million Americans came together to protest environmental destruction and honor the Earth on the first Earth Day. According to historian Adam Rome, Earth Day convinced many Americans that pollution, nuclear fallout, and pesticide use were not separate issues. All were facets of the same far-reaching environmental crisis. Less than a month after the first Earth Day, the WPI plan was approved and the IQP was born.
The visionaries who created the IQP were already in the environmental mode. We would have to find a new way to apply technology to society if we were going to avoid the kinds of horrors that were inflicting the environment.
During the 1960s, college students grew increasingly frustrated with their education. Students wanted to be treated as adults, challenged intellectually, and recognized for their individuality rather than attend another level of high school. Learning from the civil rights movement and countercultural movement, their frustration erupted in mass protest in the late 1960s and 1970s. It is widely believed that college protests were only about the Vietnam War. However, of the 9,000 student protests between 1969 and 1970, more than half were about local issues students cared about, their campus, education, and right to express themselves. For example, in 1968, 1,000 Columbia University students occupied 5 buildings to protest the construction of a campus building on parkland. They rejected the loss of public open space for a new gymnasium. Students then went on strike, forcing the cancellation of final exams. On the WPI campus, there were few protests, but students still pushed for change in other forums.
How much did the students push this? They were pushing pretty hard. They were pretty unhappy with WPI education.
A small group of dedicated faculty heard the demands of students and led the charge for a revised curriculum. One of the most important individuals was William Grogan, WPI's first Dean of Undergraduate Studies.
First thing we want to do is individual responsibility. Freedom, which you have now, to develop your own curriculum. With your advisor, you could develop your own curriculum. You didn't have, before you just went, they stamped one out on your card, and that was your program. You had no say whatsoever in what courses you took. It was absolutely rigid. And that's when we said, let's get your credentials by doing something. What can you do? And you can learn by doing. The other thing, you just regurgitate what you then. So you learn by doing. And that's when the projects came up. So we replaced the old competency exams, the old final exams, by qualifying projects.
In response, the WPI plan proposed an overhaul of the existing curriculum and the establishment of the MQP and IQP. While the Major Qualifying Project, or MQP, displayed a student's technical abilities, the Interactive Qualifying Project, or IQP, focused on the role of technology in society. Events boiled over in the spring of 1970, making it clear to the WPI faculty that a fundamental change was needed in the way the university viewed the relationship between technology and society. The first Earth Day, the expansion of the Vietnam War into Cambodia, and the resulting deadly protests at Kent State all became catalysts for change at WPI. Professor Jim Demetri, another key faculty member at the time, recalls WPI's response to Kent State. The student body at WPI got all upset about that, but they reacted in ways that were much more intelligent than window breaking and trashing the campus. There was a class holiday to talk to professors, a big assembly in Olin, speeches by deans, and a nonviolent demonstration in downtown Worcester that some WPI students got involved in.
President Hazard told me, without the Cambodian incursion in May of 1970, when the vote was taken by the faculty to accept the plan, he said that that vote would never have gone over.
The 1960s and early 1970s were a time of rethinking. A rethinking of technology and its use in Vietnam, a rethinking of America's role in the international community, a rethinking of human responsibility towards the environment, a rethinking of what college education meant.
There was a push then to, from the educational standpoint, to say, well, engineers should be leaders in society, not just leaders in technology.
On May 29, 1970, the WPI faculty voted 96-42 to implement the WPI plan, radically changing the school's curriculum. A faculty group known as the Zwiebel Committee set up the IQP as we know it today, a project exploring the complicated relationship between society and technology. Responsibility was a key part of their agenda. According to their report, the idea was to push students to assess the philosophical and social implications of their actions, and to realize that as professionals, their every act has human and social consequences. The Zwiebel Committee hoped to dispel the idea that the study of science and engineering on the one hand, and social humanistic studies on the other hand, are fundamentally non-congruent activities that may even be mutually corrupting. The IQP would help students understand the interconnections between society and technology while also teaching responsibility and leadership.
The thing that's important, I think, is for students to understand that science and technology do not exist for their own sake. They exist to serve mankind. The goal of scientific development is not just knowledge, but it is improvement of the human condition. And technology doesn't exist simply to have new gadgets and make profits, but it exists to improve the quality of life of people on the planet. And so I think that the important thing is that the project helps students realize that embeddedness, that science and technology are part of a larger and more important system that involves the planet and all the people on it.